Are cars becoming impossible to repair in 2025? Well, in this video, we're going to touch on what is different about cars now versus cars back then. It makes them harder or easier. Are there more or less resources now than there used to be for repair info, whether that is how to do the repair, whether that is parts, whether that is how to diagnose the repair, whatever that is there more? Is there less? How did they do it back then? How do we do it now? C, does the right to repair matter? Is that still a thing? Does it still matter? Does it still play any role when it comes to how cars are made, when it comes to fixing cars? And D, finally, what does it take to repair old cars? What does it take to repair new cars? And what about that would make them either A, impossible to repair, or B, easier to repair? Well, we're going to get into that and more in this video, so stay tuned. What is different about new cars versus old cars that might make them impossible to repair? Well, first, the main difference is electronics. New cars have so many different modules, that talk to each other, that all communicate with one another. I mean, the brakes talk to the airbags, which talk to the engine, which talks to the ABS signal, which talks to the wheel speed, which talks to all these different communication lines and all these different modules. They all talk to each other in new cars. So that is a very, very different thing than in the older cars, where it was mostly mechanical, mostly gearing, mostly cables, mostly that type of stuff. First, things are just a lot different now than they used to be. What else is different? Well, you got carburation. Pre-1970, I think, is about when fuel injection came out. That's basically just how your gas gets into your engine. How does it combust? And I'm not going to get into the difference between fuel injection versus carburation, but there is a lot of difference, and I can get into that in a separate video. But that is a huge difference on cars. And for myself personally, I don't know how to work on carburetors. I know how to clean them. I know how to take them apart, put them back together exactly how I took them apart. But past that, I don't know how to work on them. I don't know how to tune a distributor. I never learned that stuff because that was all before me. Versus using a scan tool or going through an automotive software, or going through a wiring diagram. That stuff I'm great at because that's like my generation. That's what I'm learning. That came out with me. So that's maybe a lot easier for me than it would be for somebody that learned the other way and now wants to try to evolve. So that is like probably the two main differences, I would say. And then the third, which is another huge one, is the difference in metal. Older cars are mostly made out of steel. They were mostly made out of solid metal. Newer cars are made a lot out of fiberglass and plastic and parts that break pretty easily, or when they do break, they're not fixable. Back in the day, you used to maybe be able to fix a part, to reuse a part, to rebuild a part. Nowadays, when something breaks, you just got to replace it. It's not worth rebuilding it. And that is a huge difference. And I would say it makes it a little easier for us nowadays because we're not really expected to rebuild a rear end as much. We're not expected to rebuild a caliper. We're not expected to rebuild an alternator. The expectations to do those things is not there because it's cheaper to just replace the part. Versus for an older guy, the expectation was you have to know how to rebuild these parts because I don't want to spend the extra $1,000 on a new one because they were built so well. So I would say that was a lot more difficult for older guys than it is for newer guys. I just replace parts. I mean, besides the diagnostic portion, mechanics nowadays are just parts changers. I mean, once you get into diag, once you get into electrical, then you kind of move into being an actual mechanic and an actual technician. But for the most part, I mean, if you're just told, hey, go replace this, you're just a parts changer. And don't get me wrong, some parts are pretty difficult to change, but back in the day, that was just not the case. You had to be able to rebuild the part, diagnose the part, and figure it all out and keep it all in tune. Versus now, the vehicle does that. It's set up from the manufacturer to read all these different sensors, to read all these different readings, and adjust itself accordingly. Where mechanic doesn't do that like they used to. So that moves into B. Are there more or less resources? Well, I think we all know with the internet, there's obviously way, way more resources for how do you repair cars. what steps do I take? Where do I go to repair my car? What kind of car do I get to not have to repair it all the time? Like you can also go into the internet. Why is there a mechanic shortage? Or what's the best mechanic? How do I trust my mechanic? How do I know how to trust my mechanic? Whereas back in the day, you either just had to hope to get lucky, you had to go out into the community, talk to people, you had to go spend hours and hours with your grandpa getting yelled at about holding a flashlight, or your dad to get that knowledge, to learn. And now it's just readily available at your fingertips. On Hair and Auto Fab's channel, you can go watch them videos. Yeah, you can see tutorials, you can get step-by-steps of how to do stuff now, whereas back in the day, you didn't have that. You had to go through service manuals, you had to go through books, you had to have that knowledge in your brain or learn it from your master mechanic, from your grandpa, from your dad, from somebody else. That knowledge wasn't just free. You had to learn it from somewhere. And I would say that makes working on cars now much easier. Whether like if I don't like the guy, I don't have to learn from him. Back in the day, you had to deal with it. You had to like him. You had to learn from him. And so things are changing now for I would say for younger mechanics in a good way, especially because the industry's tough, man. Older guys don't necessarily like showing the younger guys their tricks, so it's cool that those tricks are now online. And while I don't think that everything's online, I think that you still need human interaction. You still need to learn from them old guys. Some of my best tricks are taught to me by the master mechanics that I've learned from. So I'm not saying that that's not still valuable, because it's still invaluable, but there's just a ton more resources now than there used to be. So I would say that actually makes it easier. And then the flip side of that, or maybe not flip side, but the ability to retain or attain parts is so much easier. Go on Amazon, you can go on eBay, you can go on just directly on Google and just type in, I need this part, or go to AutoZone and just say, hey man, this is the VIN for my car, and they will tell you exactly what your part is, versus having to figure out what exact model of car you had, the different models, what the different parts were in. So that today, much, much, much easier than it used to be. So then that kind of comes in. Why do people think cars are impossible to repair nowadays versus what they used to be, if I'm just saying that this is easier now than it used to be? Well, that'll move down into point D. What does it take to repair old cars versus new cars? Well, old cars, you had to have really, really strong mechanical knowledge. You had to have knowledge of gearing, you had to have knowledge of sprockets, you had to have knowledge of everything, of how to tune it, of how to time it, how everything worked together so that you could tune it and time it well. You had to be able to listen to it and hear the sound of it and make sure that it sounded right. There was just a lot that went into it, versus now, car does that for you. You put the part in, you turn it on, you hook your scan tool up, you relearn it. The car does all that adjustment for you after you replace the part. But to actually replace that part can sometimes be a lot more difficult, because cars now, you have so many parts packed into such a tight area that you might have to take off 4, 5, 6 different things just to get to the one that you want to replace. Then on the other side of that, you have electronics, man. Electronics are brittle. They break easily. They bend easy. They cause bad connection problems, and all those problems take a lot of critical thinking, a lot of problem solving to solve. And those problems, they didn't used to exist, because we had toggle switches, we had on and off switches, versus now we have 3 different sets of voltage going to a module to tell it 3 different things. And it's just a change in complexity, and it's different. But I would say that makes it much more difficult to repair cars than what it used to be, just based on that alone. As well as, newer transmissions, newer engines, and all the internal parts. There's just so much that goes into them, because now you have direct injection. Now you have like increased fuel mileage based on what the vehicle does. Like for Chevys, you have active fuel management. You have these different things set up in the vehicles to maybe make our life easier, to make the vehicle better, but it's just making it harder and harder and harder to work on, making it more and more and more impossible to work on. Which would bring us to the final point. Does the right to repair matter? It doesn't. It doesn't. We do still have the right to repair. You'll always have the right to repair unless Congress decides to change that. However, just because you have the right to repair does not mean that they have to make the repair easy enough for you to understand. They can make it as complex as you want, and it's on you to learn it. So you have the right to repair it. They just might make it more complex than you have the ability to repair. And that is kind of where we're going in today's day and age. So what do you do about that? Well, you go on YouTube, you go on Google, you learn how to do these different repairs. You fill yourself up with knowledge, you fill yourself up with education. You find a mechanic that you trust. You learn about your vehicle, so when you go to a mechanic, you know what he's saying, and you can understand if he's trying to take advantage of you, if he's trying to scam you, if you're a single mother, if he's trying to do these things, you have understanding, and you can be like, no, man, something doesn't sound right. I'm going to take my car down the road, and I would say that that's the best thing you can do as a consumer, as a customer, is to educate yourself. But yeah, are cars becoming impossible to repair? They're becoming harder. They're becoming more complex, but there's more resources, more parts availability, and just more availability for tools, quality tools, and things that will help you get the job done. So are the cars overall getting harder? Yes. But is the ability to figure out how to fix them cars getting easier? Yes. So I think that goes hand in hand and does, I don't know, balance out. But yeah, thank you guys for joining out today, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Later.